Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Erin Ducat with Ducat Chiropractic and Sports Medicine here in Bloomingdale. And today I'm interviewing Chris with Extra Mile Running in Schaumburg. He's going to talk to us a little bit about shoes, walking and running shoes, how to get started with a new running program, and then, of course, a little bit about his store and services. So, welcome, Chris.
Hi, Dr. Ducat. Thank you for having me today.
So, let's start with tell us just a little bit about what you do and what Extra Mile is.
Sure. So, Extra Mile is a sit and fit footwear store. So, we specialize in running shoes. Most of our clientele is going to be either runners or walkers. And then a big part of our business is also medical referrals. And that could be people with, bunions, neuroma, neuropathy, rehabbing from injury, you pretty much name it. And we'll see those folks coming in here. We believe your feet are your foundation. And so the one essential piece of gear for walking and running is going to be proper footwear.
So can like regular people come to your store, or do you have to be like, a marathon runner or something like that?
No, great question. And actually, in the past year, that's one of we get all these phone calls now with COVID. Are you guys open? Do I have to make an appointment? No, we're not. We're not quite like that. So walk-ins are perfectly welcome. Anybody can come in here at any time during business hours and get a gait analysis done for free by one of our staff members. Our goal really is just to make sure that people are staying healthy as they achieve their goal, whether that's qualifying for the Boston Marathon or just getting out and walking for 30 minutes on a Tuesday morning.
So as a chiropractor, I can definitely understand how your feet are your foundation, and it has a big effect on the rest of your body and how you move and perform. So can you tell us just a little bit about like some tips of what to look for in a good shoe, whether you're walking or running?
Yeah, and that's going to make a good segue into some of what your shoes won't do for you as well. So what to look for in a quality shoe is really all in the midsole. So between that hard rubber outsole and the sock liner, that space in the middle there, that's where your investment goes in a good pair of shoes. It's all about the durability, the elasticity, the resilience of that midsole foam that's going to make things a little bit easier on your joints and really help you to withstand the impact that you're putting on your body on a daily basis. There's a couple other things that you'll want to look at their arch support. You might look at the heel to toe offset. So a lot of shoes will have a little bit of an excessive lift in the heel compared to the stack height of the shoe at the forefoot. But that's something more that we talk about in store, and we personalize that to the individual. So that's part of our process, kind of trying to figure out that. Our goal really is to make it simple for the consumer, and to keep it simple, really what you need is good quality materials in your shoe.
So is there like a certain price point that, indicates it's a quality shoe? Because I notice, if you go to Kohl's or something like that, you can see some athletic shoes there, and they look cool and they seem squishy. And how are those different than maybe some of the shoes that you have on the rack behind you right now?
Yeah, it's really all under the hood, right? So you can find a shoe at, a Kohl's or a big box retailer, and it's going to have a good step-in feel, but the devil's usually in the details. So to manufacture foam that is going to have a high level of elasticity, which means one, it's going to give you a little spring in your step, it's going to return to its initial shape, and it's going to again lighten the workload on your joints, is going to cost you a little bit more. And in addition to that, the best products out there are what's called a closed cell foam. And what that means is that it's not going to suck up moisture. It's not going to be as susceptible to changes in temperature, which one, it increases the durability of that product, and two, it increases the performance. If you buy a cheap pair of shoes this time of year, you're probably going to feel like you're running on bricks because it's going to be cold outside. And that cheap foam is going to respond to that, and it's going to be really uncomfortable. When you tried them on at the store, they felt great. But when you actually put it to a performance test, it's going to fail. So the break point is usually around $100 to get that kind of quality. So you're kind of in the 100 at the low end up to 160, 180 for the high end, more performance shoes. So depending what type of consumer you are, that's about what you should expect to spend.
So, sounds like, you're investing a little bit of money in your shoes, which I, again, as a chiropractor, I totally advocate because I see the repercussions of what happens when you don't. But how often do you need to change out your shoes? And I guess there's a couple different scenarios, like the difference between, I'm just, doing some daily, walks, 30-minute walks and walking around town. And then also for someone who maybe is running a few miles, several days a week. How long, do those shoes last?
That's a great question. So what we typically tell people, if they're a casual wearer, so if they're just wearing them for kicking around and they've had foot problems before or what have you, we'll tell them about 6 to 12 months, depending on how much time on their feet they spend in a day. If you're if you're using them more for athletics, whether that's Orange Theory or running or strength training or what have you, we will typically say between 3 to 500 miles. So that can vary greatly. A runner who's putting in 40 miles a week, they're going to go through 150 plus miles in a month. They're going to replace their shoes possibly every 2 months. Versus somebody that's logging maybe 10 miles a week, hey, they might still be able to hit that 4 to 6 month time frame. So it varies on the individual. Typically, what we recommend is if you think that your shoes are about cooked, it's probably time to either get another pair to rotate. Having a point of comparison, a control there is always nice, and you can always tell when one shoe is feeling a heck of a lot better than the other. Or just come in, use our store as a showroom, and try them on side by side, and you'll be able to tell pretty quickly if it's cooked.
So you mentioned, Orange Theory and some strength training workouts, stuff like that. Should I use the same shoes for my strength training as I do my distance running? If I'm going to go out and run a 5K, let's say.
Yeah, so the short answer there is no. The long answer and the practical answer oftentimes is yes, and it depends on the consumer. So for an Orange Theory, where you're doing some circuit training, you're mixing in some running, it's not really practical to be changing your shoes out, 2 to 4 times throughout the course of a workout. That's kind of ridiculous. But right, they're also not doing CrossFit or Olympic weightlifting, right? They're not throwing up, 350-pound squats and stuff like that. So it depends really what kind of strength training the individual is doing. If you're doing, clean and jerk and you're doing really a lot of Olympic weightlifting type stuff and CrossFit stuff, we're going to have different footwear recommendations for you outside of the shoes that are going to be strictly run focused. More specifically, what we'll do, so if somebody's going to be wearing the same shoe, because let's face it, there is a cost involved. You can't just have 20 pairs of shoes, for every purpose. So if somebody is going to be wearing the same pair of shoes, usually what we recommend is getting something with a lower stack height and something that has a balanced platform. The last thing that we want to do is to have you, throwing up weights and doing squats and stuff where your foot is not in a more neutral position. And some of the running shoes will take your foot out of that neutral position.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting over the years, kind of the change in philosophy, I know a decade ago I was running in a shoe and working out in a shoe that had, a pretty high heel on it. And then one day I remember just saying, I feel like I'm running in high heels. And then I started understanding a little bit more of that heel to toe kind of angle and ratio and started going flatter and flatter. And then actually here at work, I wear an entirely minimalistic shoe. So it's perfectly flat. I actually run in the Ultras, which I can see right above your head there. And they're really flat with some cushion, those Torrens. Yep, right there. And then I do CrossFitting in like a Nike Metcon, which again is a very, very flat shoe, more rigid for what I'm doing in that CrossFit workout, but I've kind of gotten used to that situation. When I bought my last pair of Metcons, what was interesting is it did come with like an extra heel lift. So if you wanted to put it in when you're doing some of the Olympic lifts or thrusters or wall balls or something like that, you could use it. And I was actually talking to the owner, one of the owners of CrossFit Roselle, and asking him kind of his opinion, because my opinion was the longer you could work in something that was entirely neutral and flat, the better. And he kind of concurred, because the more you build up that heel, it tends to kind of shorten up those calf muscles and kind of builds in a crutch. Now, some people you mentioned might need that crutch. Do you have, like let's say they've had surgeries, or, they've had 60 years on these joints and that calf just isn't opening up anymore. Do you have some shoes that have a little bit higher of a heel? Recommendations for those folks too?
Yeah, within the market, that's still the lion's share of shoes. You mentioned Altra. Um, Altra is actually the only brand in the market space, except for Zero, that has a completely balanced platform across all their lines. What most brands have is a variety of heel to toe offsets, but most of them stay around that 8 to 10 millimeter range. Ultra is really an outlier there. And I think you mentioned that time frame about 10 years ago. I think it was just a little over that when the big fad came out, Born to Run, natural running became a huge thing. And you start to see people running in very minimalistic barefoot shoes. And one of the myths that we've had to dispel since then is that a balanced platform shoe or a zero drop shoe doesn't necessarily mean a minimalist shoe. That Ultra Torin is a really well cushioned, we call it a max cushion shoe. It's very plush. It just happens to be set on a balanced platform. So that's one of the myths that we have to dispel there. And to kind of go back to your question, yeah, what you'll find is the majority of shoes in the market are still going to have that added lift in the heel. And a lot of our consumers need that, because for them to transition to a balanced platform, that might be a multi-step process, as they kind of have to stretch and lengthen, some of those calf and Achilles muscles. The lower drops also work the hamstring a little bit more when you're running. So
that's awesome. And I notice I've got some patients that have had like foot and ankle issues in the past, and after a little time and some adjustments, all of a sudden, things open up and they can go to that zero drop shoe. And then that, in my opinion, just kind of helps keep things loose. It's kind of like stretching without having to stretch. Every time you take, it just kind of opens things up. What are some other myths out there that you think are kind of perpetuating about athletic shoes?
I think in the run community, the biggest myth that we run into, not just in the store, but just out on the trails running, is, will switching my shoes result in an injury? And that's a myth that is pretty easily dispelled, but like many things, we're very superstitious. We tend to think that correlation is causation. So I switched my shoes and I got injured. It must have been the shoes. Usually that's not so. You'll find a lot of parity across the industry. So, if you look at the leading 6 or 8 brands within run specialty, the quality is higher than it's ever been. So if you're looking at a shoe that's a standard 8 millimeter drop, it's on a neutral platform, the chances that you switched from a gel Cumulus to a 361 Meraki or something like that, having any significant impact on your occurrence of injury is much, much less than the fact that usually it's muscle strength and effective training, or rather ineffective training, that will lead to injury. This time of year, we see it with a lot of folks where it's too much too soon. It starts to get nice out. We've been doing 2 or 3 days a week. Maybe some on the treadmill, some on the bike, some strength exercises on our floor. We get, oh, it's nice out. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to go run 20 miles a week or whatever it is. And that's when we start to see injuries creeping in. And it's really because we just didn't take a measured approach to our training. Another myth that you'll kind of see is that there's a best shoe out there at all.
Yes. People ask me about this all the time.
Yeah. I mean, if there was, then we would just have shoe and that would be what we stocked on the wall. But instead, you can see we have dozens of choices, and, they're all for a different purpose. You might wear a Nike Metcon or a Reebok Nano for CrossFit. But, a lot of the more serious performance-minded runners, they're going to have a long run shoe, a neutral easy day shoe, and then they'll have a speed shoe, and they might even have a racing shoe. And they all have a slightly different purpose. The racing shoes are lighter, they're more taxing on your body, but, anything goes in competition, but it's not something that you should subject your body to on a daily basis. But man, those shoes can really shave a few minutes off your marathon time if that's what you're into. So there's no best shoe. Our approach here is to get to know every individual who walks in the door. We have a staff policy that we talk to you for 5 minutes before we pull out a pair of shoes, because we really need to get to know if you're, just a casual walker, what your injury history looks like, what you've been using before, versus, what we're going to pull and fit you for, because we want to be responsible about it and make sure that you have, the best experience with us, not just for that visit, but long term.
And what I appreciate about your store is you do have a lot of different group runs and then programs that are available to the community. Can you tell us just a little bit about some of the things coming up this spring that some of our listeners can participate with?
Yeah, so it's really, really exciting. So on March 1st, we're bringing back our Monday night group runs. Those are at 6:15 p.m. All paces are welcome for that. We have everything from walk run up to the guys in front who are doing 7-minute miles. Usually well attended when it's fair weather for that. Then on April 6th, which is a Tuesday, we start our Couch to 5K program. So that's beginning runners. So if you've been away from running for, 6 to 12 months, or if you've never really been a runner, but you want to start, that's a really, really good group to get involved with. They're amazing people. Our coach, Diane, is incredible at making sure that nobody, feels like, like they're not welcome or that they're too slow. We always say forward is a pace. And if you're a backpacker, you're the person who we want in that group. And then the community itself is really wonderful. A lot of them have just done the program in the spring and the fall with us now. This will be our 4th year that we're offering it. And they just like to do the program because the reason they come is the people. And it's great. It's a free program. So we'd recommend, following our social accounts, maybe signing up for our email list if you go to extramilerunning.com. And you'll get a notification in March when the dates and times for that are solidified. But the first workout will be on April 6th, which is a Tuesday at 6:15 p.m.
Awesome. And is there any kind of last closing words of advice that you have for someone maybe, who has been kind of hibernating here over winter and now is kind of, the weather's getting nicer and getting outside? How would you recommend making that a successful transition this spring?
Just be intentional about how you return to the outdoors and return to activity. Come in and get a gait analysis. That can change over time as different muscle groups get weaker, stronger, overcompensate for others, and so on and so forth. So especially if you've been doing a lot of sitting, like many of us have, do it safely. Make sure that you invest in the proper footwear for it, and be really intentional again about your training. No more than a 10% increase per week. You'll see a lot of, if you Google it, you'll see a lot of folks out there say don't increase your mileage by more than 10% a week. What we preach here is more, let's focus on minutes and not miles. So if your long run was 20 minutes last week, make it 22 minutes this week. That 10% rule within a month or two, holy cow, you'll see your volume go up a lot. So just don't be too aggressive with it, because you'll do a lot better if you don't get injured. If you do get injured, seek help from a good chiropractor or physical therapist.
Thank you for the plug there. And when you say increase by 10%, so time, and then what about speed? So, last year, maybe I was running a pretty good clip by the end of the season because I had nothing else to do but run, right? Should I immediately try, the same pace as I go out this spring?
No, your body will remember what it's capable of. So you'll get out and for 5 minutes, whatever it is, you'll feel great. And then everything will fall apart. Usually what we recommend is if you've taken time off, take at least 2 to 4 weeks to build back your base. So that's just consistent, moderate to easy effort. get your body used to that level of activity. And then if you were the type who was mixing in some higher intensity intervals, once your body's made that adjustment, start working those back in.
All right, cool, great advice. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'll be sure to post all your social links and website in the notes for this interview. And I hope that we can all join you up at Extra Mile Running for your programs this spring.
That's always good when you're here, Dr. Aaron.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.